Mr. President, represented by counsel, I believe we are ready to proceed. Anything from the state before we proceed?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor.
Travis McMichael.
No, Your Honor.
From Greg McMichael.
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Bryan.
No, Your Honor.
All right, let's go ahead and get the witness back on the stand.
When we did Matt Albenze, you guys had him read his phone number?
Yes, let's talk about
That is not cool, I think.
Yeah, I meant to. In fact, maybe got my contacts. Hold on just a second, sir. Yeah, I noticed that. I didn't want to, actually, I'm not sure I want to do this on the record, but if we could maybe discuss, if there is some personal information like that, that's part of a recording, or let's figure out whether that's something that can be removed. I don't think it needs, information like that needs to come up in questioning unless you can explain to me, I'm looking at everybody, how it's material to the case. But under the circumstances of this case, I do ask that if personal identifying, well, not personal identifying information, if things as specific as a telephone number are out there, I ask that they not be injected into the case unless they are material in some way.
Yes, Judge.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me, Ms. Oak. All right. Come on forward. All right. I'll remind you on the road. Sure. Go to seat. All right. Let's go get the panel. All right, good afternoon. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody enjoyed their lunch. We are ready to go ahead and proceed with the evidence in this case from the state.
Thanks, Your Honor. So, Mr. Lowry, to follow up on something we talked about before, what was your role in this investigation, in this case?
I was initially lead before it was given or taken by the GBI.
Okay.
Because I was on call that day.
Okay, so you were a lead detective?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So before we took a break, you testified that Mr. Bryan hollered at the truck y'all got him. Do you
Yes,
remember
ma'am.
that?
I do.
And then he proceeded to get into his truck. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about what happened after that. If you can just look at the screen. Sure, I can. Okay. And Mr. Lowry, have you seen these excerpts
I
from
have.
the transcript?
I have.
Have we gone through them together in preparation for your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so if you can just read there on page 5, starting at line 18 and down to line 25.
So I just kind of sat there for a minute and didn't really know what to do. And then he was trucking. So, I mean, he closed in on me quick. And as soon as he got up to me, I overshot the road. I was kind of angled. I overshot the road and forced him to go down into the ditch right there. I say, okay. And then Mr. Bryan says, I don't know if he went through.
Okay, so starting from line 18, who is talking there?
Mr. Bryan.
Okay, so he's saying he kind of angled and then overshot the road and forced Ahmaud to go into a ditch. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and which road are we on here? Which road is he talking about, Mr. Bryan?
I think this is still on Burford.
Burford Road, okay. Is that right outside his driveway?
Yes.
Okay. So let's now talk about the second incident with Mr. Bryan and Ahmaud. If you can just read here, starting from line 1.
The water or over it or what, but he bounced around me. So I was hanging on pretty good. And I think I backed up into my driveway and came back this way.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there. Is this page a continuation of the one that we just went over?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so can you start then reading from 25 and then go straight on to this second page?
I can.
Okay?
Mr. Bryan says, I don't know if he went through the water or over it or what, but he bounced around me, so I was hanging on pretty good, and I think I backed up into my driveway and came back this way.
Okay, and what did you say?
I say, okay, and then Mr. Bryan says, and I angled my truck at him again. I think he kind of turned around. I missed him or whatever, but that's when I told the other officer this. We were still right about in this area right here. And I say,
Okay, so this second incident here, when Mr. Bryan is talking about angling my truck at him again, which road are they on with this second incident?
I believe this is still on Burford, just maybe a little bit further down.
Okay, so Burford Road.
I'm going to check leading characterization, second incident. That wasn't what the witness said.
Go ahead and explain.
So when we talk about second incident, Mr. Lowry, what are we talking about? What are we referencing?
The second time that Mr. Bryan would have tried to use his vehicle to steer Mr. Arbery off the road.
Okay. From your interview with Mr. Bryan, was there a third time he tried to do that?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, so looking at, let me see what page we're on here. Page 6, lines 11 through 20. Can you go ahead and read that, please?
I can. Mr. Bryan says, not back to the road that it happened on yet. I think I backed up and kind of went at him a little bit, and I can see that he was coming towards the truck. I mean, I had my window down. He was coming. He was trying to get in the truck at that point, so I slammed it into drive and jumped out away from him. I mean, and me and the other officer looked. My truck's dirty. You can see where his hands were on the side, almost at the door, where he was, trying to get it open. So.
Okay. So here, when Mr. Bryan says not back to the road that it happened on yet, which road did it happen on, meaning the incident?
Holmes Road.
Okay. So at this point, Mr. Bryan's saying he's not back on that road yet. So which road was Mr. Bryan on when this happened?
Still Burford.
Burford Road. Okay. Is there another time in the interview that Mr. Bryan doubles back to talk about here again with his belief that the victim tried to get into his truck?
I object to the characterization doubles back. Can we find another way to ask that question that's a little less loaded?
I can try. So, Mr. Lowry, during the course of your interview with Mr. Bryan, does he mention for a second time that his belief that the victim tried to get into his truck?
I don't believe if he mentioned it a second. You're talking about during the sit-down interview. He did say it there, yes.
Okay.
I don't remember if that was the first or a second time.
Okay, so go ahead and look in your transcript. Don't read anything, just look to refresh your recollection at page 18, lines 1 through 13.
Oh, yes, okay.
Okay, so in this quote that we just read, Mr. Bryan is talking about backing up and going at the victim and saying his belief that the victim was trying to get into his truck, right?
I object to the leading going at.
Well, that's what he's saying here.
I don't think she's got that correct.
The transcript's on the screen, so ladies and gentlemen, the transcript is what reflects the statement of the defendant. Go ahead.
So Mr. Bryan again mentioned something about the victim, his belief that the victim was going into his truck on page 18, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at that one. If you can just read that, starting from line 1 going to line 13.
Okay. I say, okay, all right. And you said that you had handprints on your truck from where the guy was trying to get into it. Mr. Bryan says, I feel pretty sure that's what he was doing. I mean, I can't say for sure that he wasn't on the door. I didn't give him a chance to get to the door, but after I angled him off the side of the road, and I kind of went on past him because I didn't hit him. Wish I might have took him out and not get him shot. But I probably got past him a little bit, and he come up on me, and I could see him in my mirror, and he was coming for the door, and I seen his hands on right behind the door.
Okay, so in this one, Mr. Bryan's talking about wishing he had hit the victim, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, was there a fourth incident where Mr. Bryan is talking about making contact with the victim in the case?
Yes, I believe the one you're referring to is the intersection of Holmes and Satilla, or Holmes and Burford.
Okay, so let's look at that one. So going to page 13, lines 9 through 25, go ahead and read that for us, please.
Mr. Bryan says, I think I backed into my drive and then continued on Burford towards, and I say, the entrance, because you said you passed the road first. Mr. Bryan says, yeah, towards the entrance, but I confronted him, angled at him again before we got to the road he was laying on. I say, yeah. Mr. Bryan says, right at the house that's on the left-hand side if you're headed towards the entrance of the neighborhood. And I say, you're talking about before the intersection of the road where it actually happened on? And Mr. Bryan says, right. And I say, okay.
Okay, so which street were they on when this happened?
This would have still been Burford at the intersection of Holmes.
Okay, so that corner there on Burford.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there another time in your interview where Mr. Bryan talks about this incident that we just looked at again?
Can you refresh me?
I can. Go ahead and turn to page 14, lines 1 through 18. And just read it to yourself and let me know if your memory has been refreshed.
Okay, yes.
Okay? So at some point he kind of talked about that some more during the interview, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at that. So page 14, lines 1 through 18. Go ahead and read that, please.
Mr. Bryan says, yes, before then, I angled at him again. I say, okay. Mr. Bryan says, and he jumped out of the way, and I went on past. And I say, and then you passed the intersection of the road that it actually took place on? And Mr. Bryan says, right. I say, did you back up or just U-turn because you said you? And then Mr. Bryan said, I was fixing, I put it in reverse and was going to back up at him. I say, mm-hmm. Mr. Bryan says that's when he made his move to go down the road it happened on. And I say, okay, so you backed up and then turned down that road? And Mr. Bryan says, yep.
Okay. So what area are they in, meaning Mr. Bryan and the victim? What area are they in right here when this is going on?
I'm believing this is still the intersection of Burford and Holmes, or Burford where it turns into Satilla and Holmes.
Okay, because Mr. Bryan is saying that he jumped out of the way and I went past him. And then when you pass the intersection of the road it actually took place on, and then he says right. And what's the intersection where it took place?
Burford and Holmes, or Satilla and Holmes.
Satilla and Holmes, okay. And then you asked him, did you back up or just U-turn? And Mr. Bryan says, I was fixing, I put it in reverse and was going to back up at him. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then Mr. Bryan says, and that's when he made his move to go down the road it happened on. And what road did it happen on?
Holmes Road.
Okay. So this right here is when the victim made his move to go down Holmes Road where he was ultimately killed.
Yes.
So was there another incident of attempted contact between Mr. Bryan and the victim?
I object to the leading.
Was there another?
Mine is a different objection, but I'll let you go on.
That would telling the witness the answer. We're not just referring to the number of the incident.
I'll permit it a little bit with the use of transcripts, so if we're narrowing in on a portion of transcript.
Okay. So,
Your Honor, we've been extremely patient, but there was a pretrial order regarding the overuse of the word victim. It can come out incidentally or by accident, but it is better to use the name of the person we're talking about. Victim is a characterization.
Just to be consistent here again, the court's ruling is already in the record. So.
I'll try to lessen my use of the word victim, Judge. So, Mr. Lowry, did something also happen from Mr. Bryan's statement on Holmes Road?
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
So I want to point you to page 15. Actually, before we get there, page 7, lines 9 through 16. And ask you to read right here what's on the screen.
Okay. Mr. Bryan says, all right, so I backed up and started going down that way. I think I angled at him again, kind of forced him off the road or something right in here, and he turned around. He turned around right here, the black guy did. He turned around maybe down this far or so, but he turned around and started running back the other way, and I pulled into a drive or something and started to turn around. I say, okay.
Okay. And was there a continuation of things happening on Holmes Road?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about that. So now looking at page 15, lines 13 through 25.
I'm sorry, I'm going to object to the characterization of continuing when these statements are 8 pages apart. You've gone from page 7 to page 15, it's a continuation.
I'm just going to rephrase that.
Okay. The last one, the last quote that we put up on the screen, was that the last thing that happened on Holmes Road? Not this one, but the one before.
Oh, I'm sorry, could you put it back?
I'll repeat it. You want me to put it back up here?
Or just repeat it?
Okay.
Either way.
Yeah, so when we talked about this last quote, was that essentially the end of what happened on Holmes
yeah.
Road? Okay. Did something happen after that?
Yes.
Let's talk about that. So going to page...
I'm going to object. We need to clarify, since the state has already acknowledged that this has gone through multiple times. Are we mixing together two different statements in the same statement? What are we doing here? I object.
I believe that's something we can talk to him about when you get him across, right?
You can go ahead and clarify that. Go ahead.
Clarify what...
No, I said it can be clarified across. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Mr. Lowry, can you please read page 15 from line 13 to 25?
Yes. I say, so you went straight and missed the intersection. Mr. Bryan says, right. I say, and you were going to back up? Mr. Bryan says, and then I backed over on that other road. And I say, went up this road? And Mr. Bryan says, yeah. And he, at that point, he's still running from me. Okay, he's running from me, and I'm coming at him. But in any case, he turned around and started coming back. At that point, I think I may have angled at him again or something, but I didn't put much emphasis on it. I just wanted to get turned around.
Okay. And what road is Mr. Bryan and Ahmaud on when we see this happening?
This is on Holmes Road.
On Holmes Road, okay. And Mr. Bryan says, he's running from me and I'm coming at him. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, was there something else that happened on Holmes Road after what we just discussed?
Yes, that was the shooting and the murder itself took place right after.
Okay. And is there another portion of Mr. Bryan's interview where he talks about something leading up to that? And I'll direct you to refresh your recollection to page 7, lines 19 through 25.
Yes.
7, 19 through 25. You see it?
Yes.
Okay. So that was a yes,
Yes.
Mr. Lowry? Okay, let's talk about that. Go ahead and read this to the jury.
Mr. Bryan says, at this point, I didn't really know, but I got turned around good. And by that time is when I rounded that corner enough to see the black guy was right there, but really wasn't running anymore. Looked like at this point, like I say, he just had enough of the running and he was confronted.
Okay. So Mr. Bryan is saying when he rounded the corner enough to see the black guy really wasn't running anymore. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it looked like at that point he was confronted.
Yes.
Who was confronted?
Mr. Arbery.
At some point during your interview, did you ask Mr. Bryan whether he had ever seen Mr. Arbery before?
Yes.
Okay. And what did he tell you?
No.
Okay. Did you ask him, if you can just go ahead and read page 18 on to 19, starting from lines 23. So is this where you ask him, have you seen him before?
Yes.
Okay, just read what he says.
He says, I have not seen him. I say, okay, do you know of him being involved in any past instances? Mr. Bryan says, that I know of, no. I say, okay. And he says, I mean, I just hear of stuff that's been happening around the neighborhood. Nobody said anything.
So during the course of your interview, did Mr. Bryan tell you that there might be some sort of evidence on his truck?
Yes.
Okay, what did he tell you about that?
That he believed there were palm prints or fingerprints and dents on his truck.
Okay, and what did you do with that information?
After the interview, I went outside and processed his truck, photographed and collected fingerprints and fibers.
Okay, and where was that truck located?
It was in the front of the Glenn County Police Department.
Okay, did you also you said you took photographs?
Yes, ma'am.
May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lowry, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes, and some numbers are missing, but we'll go states 200, 201, 202, 206, 205, 207, 209, 210, 211, 214, 213, and 215.
Okay.
Go ahead and look at these and tell me if you recognize them.
Yes.
Okay.
These look like the pictures that I took.
That you took, and are they fair and accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do they appear to be altered in any way?
No, ma'am.
At this time, we would tender states 200 to 202, 205 to 207, 209 to 211, and 213 to 215.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection.
Thank you. Permission to publish, Judge. Thank you. All right. Okay, so looking at states 200, Mr. Lowry, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes. That's kind of a faraway shot of a dent that was on the driver's side of Mr. Bryan's truck on the bed part of it over the tailgate or over the gas cap.
Okay, And Judge, is it okay if he can step down just to point to where all this stuff is?
Yeah, make sure you're very careful doing that, stepping that off.
Yes, sir.
Okay? And just make sure, maybe we can kind of use this microphone. Oh, you don't have to point on the screen. We're just going to point maybe with like this pen or your finger, whatever you want to use. So where are we looking at? What part of the truck are we looking at here?
This is the driver's side of the truck on the back by the bed.
Okay. And what did you find on that side of the truck?
There were several smudges, looked like fingerprints, a dent, and some fibers.
Okay. So in States 200, what do we see here?
In this, you can see one of the dents. That's going to be that right there.
Okay. And you also mentioned some fibers.
That's correct.
Okay. Do we see the fibers, or what you believed to be fibers, in States 200?
I don't think you can really see them in this, but there's a closer shot of them. They're right above this dent on this black strip of plastic.
Okay. So they're in that area, we just can't see them in this picture.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm going to slide one more past you. So looking at States 201, what do we see here in this picture?
I see some of the smudges and prints that I was talking about. You can see a little bit of one right here on the front of the back driver's side door, and another one right here just above the handle of the driver's door.
Okay. So looking at 202, what are we looking at in 202?
This is just a close-up of the last picture that was shown with the same smudge right at the start of the back driver's side door, and then the smaller smudge over the handle of the driver's door.
Okay. 206?
This is the same shot again, just from a different angle. I was trying to work with the reflection and everything in the background, but
Okay.
larger smudge on just the very start of the back driver's side door, and then smaller smudge on the driver's door just above the handle.
Okay. And looking at States 205?
This, I believe, is are two smudges that were just above the, I guess you'd call it weather stripping, between the door and the window of the driver's door.
Okay. States 207?
And this is just a closer shot of the same bigger smudge that we saw on the start of the backside driver's door.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this area right here, what area is this?
That would be the driver's door.
Driver's door. And then what's this?
The rear side or rear driver's side door.
What about States 209?
209 is, I believe, there's a smudge in the middle of the door right here.
And which door?
This would be the driver's side rear door.
And States 210?
Yeah, just be aware of the juror behind you. So
I'm
as
sorry.
you're moving, she's moving, so just be aware.
Sorry.
This is another smudge. I believe this was also on the driver's side door. I just don't recall if this was from the front door or the back door.
Okay, so driver's side, either front door or back door.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. And States 211?
In this picture, you can't really see what I was trying to capture, but right about here, there was some kind of weird impression that it looked like it came from a volleyball. I could see it's like Y shapes that would be like hexagonal on a volleyball or a soccer ball or something.
Okay. But it's not visible in States 211?
No, you can't see it at all. It was very, very faint.
Okay. Did you process that at all?
No, I think I just photographed it.
Okay. And just tell the jury why not.
I thought it was a ball.
Okay.
I thought it was impact with a soccer ball or something.
Because it looked like a ball shape?
Yes.
Okay. States 214.
This is going to be closer of the white fibers that I mentioned above that dent and above the gas cap on the driver's side of the vehicle.
And can you just point to where those supposed white fibers are?
It'll be right here on this plastic strip.
Okay. And 213.
This is the same photo, just closer. The white fibers on the plastic strip.
Okay. And state 215.
And this is the same. The white fibers on that same area of the same plastic strip.
Okay. And you can have a seat. Thank you so much. So, did you note anything about the fibers as compared to the dent that you saw?
That it was directly above it. It looked like they could have happened at the same time.
Okay. Are you able to say, just by looking at all this, when any kind of contact happened?
No.
Okay. So you just saw whatever it was on the truck?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you talked about processing the smudges, as you call them. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell us how you go about doing that.
I used black fingerprint powder, a fingerprint brush. I used the black powder and they call it developing the latent prints or the ridge details.
Okay.
After they become more visible with the black powder, it's collected with Searchy brand tape and placed on it's basically an index card, called them fingerprint cards, so I think there's like a light layer of lamination or something on them.
Okay. So do you take a brush, put powder on the prints, and brush it?
Essentially, yes.
Okay, and then you lift it with the tape?
Correct.
Okay, and what do you do after that?
Those are submitted into a fingerprint box for those that have, I believe it's IAFIS, the certification that allows them to do fingerprint matchups and fingerprint searches.
Okay. Now, what about the fibers? What did you do with those?
Those I collected with tape. I fixed those to a black index card, and I submitted those to the GBI.
Okay, all right. So after your interview with Mr. Bryan, did you find out that the person who was killed was identified?
Yes.
Okay. And how was he identified?
Through fingerprints.
Okay. And what was the identification?
Mr. Ahmaud Arbery.
Okay. Now, after talking to Mr. Bryan, did you submit his phone for anything?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What did you do with his phone?
After he signed the consent waiver, consent form, I handed it off to Sergeant Oliver for downloading.
Okay. And did Sergeant Oliver then turn it over to another investigator?
Yes.
Who?
Investigator Marcy.
Okay. Now, after that, do you recall ever going over to 220 Satilla Drive?
I'm sorry, I forgot the number. Which house was 220?
Do you recall a construction site or a
yes.
house under construction being a part of this investigation?
Yes, it was. It was much later that evening that I went there, though. But yes.
But you went there?
Yes.
Okay. And who did you go with?
I believe it was Investigator Marcy, Investigator Ramos, and maybe Sergeant Oliver.
Okay. And did you see any like expensive tools there in that home, in that construction site?
I think I remember seeing saws or drills or something like that.
Okay. So you saw multiple tools there?
I don't know about multiple. I don't remember how many I saw, but I do remember seeing tools there.
Okay. And how did the structure appear to you?
On the inside, it was mostly just framing. There weren't. I don't think walls were erected in all the building yet. It was missing doors and windows.
Okay. Did it appear that it was rummaged through in any way?
No.
Okay. How did it appear?
Like a house under construction.
Okay.
Yeah, just unrummaged, I guess.
Unrummaged. Could you tell if anything had been moved or destroyed or anything like that?
I couldn't.
You couldn't tell. Okay. Now, and is that still on February 23rd that we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So the next day, February 24th, after meetings in the morning, what did you do?
I think I had training for the rest of the day. I think I had SWAT training.
SWAT.
Other investigators went out and did a canvass in the neighborhood while I was in training, but yeah.
Okay, so you were doing SWAT training.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. After that, did you do anything else on the case?
I to go back and review. I can't remember in detail immediately.
Okay, so I want to direct your attention to March 4th, 2020, and a person by the name of Daniel Alcott.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, so did you meet with Mr. Alcott?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay.
I believe it arose because I guess he was concerned about the number of vehicles stopping around his house at the site, and he was concerned that the public was going to think that he was somehow involved.
Okay.
So he had a young child at home, his wife and all that. I went over and spoke to them, heard their concerns, and
Okay.
got kind of an additional, or I guess a first-time statement from Mr. Alcott. I wasn't ever sure if somebody else had spoken to him that day, but I think he said that he...
Well, so we're not going to get into what he said.
Oh, I
okay?
apologize.
No,
I
that's
apologize.
fine. But you met with him on March 4th.
Yes.
Okay. So on March 5th, did you send the fibers off to GBI for testing?
Yes.
Okay. And had the prints been sent already? The prints that you left it?
I don't know. I don't know if those were reviewed in-house or if they were done by the GBI. I think it's all in-house review, but I'm not sure.
You're not sure about that. Okay. Now, on March 5th, what was the status of your case as the lead detective at that time? Was it a closed case? Was it an open case? What was the status?
It was still open, but not gaining much traction.
Okay. So it was sort of inactive.
Yes.
Objection, that's not what he said.
Say what it is.
Okay. When you say not getting much traction, what do you mean?
I think inactive was a fair summary.
Okay. Now, before this case, had you ever looked at the citizen's arrest law that was on the books in Georgia?
I'm sure I did.
Objection, relevant.
Your Honor, it goes to how he handled the case, given the fact that citizen's arrest is a part of the case.
I thought the state was making the same objection yesterday to another witness.
I'm not asking him to get into the law and what it is, but had he ever looked at it?
And what's that relevant to?
Well, let's see if it's right.
We join the relevance objection, what he knows about citizens arrest
Well,
laws.
that wasn't the question, not what he knows.
Had he ever looked at the law? That's it.
Yeah, well, and that's not relevant whether he's ever looked at the law. That's sustained.
So, did the word citizen's arrest come up at any point during any of the interviews of the defendants in this case?
No.
I believe he interviewed Roddy. Bryan.
That's sustained.
Did the word citizen's arrest come up in Roddy Bryan's interview?
No.
So at some point, did you become aware, I think you mentioned that the GBI took over the investigation?
Yes.
Okay. And did you turn your file over to them after that?
I don't know if it was me specifically that handed it over, but it was relinquished. Everything that we had was provided to them.
Okay. Now, going back to your interview with Mr. Bryan, did he have a cell phone on him during this incident where he was chasing in his truck?
He did.
Okay. Did he ever say that he called 911?
No.
Did Mr. Bryan ever say that Ahmaud had a weapon
No.
on him that day?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Did Mr. Bryan ever say Ahmaud made any verbal threats towards him or any other person that day?
No.
Okay. Did he make any threatening gestures towards Mr. Bryan or anybody else that day?
I'm going to object. I let 4 leading questions go in a row. I think that's number 5. Can we find a way to ask the questions that doesn't suggest the answer to the witness?
It's not suggesting the answer. He can say yes or no.
In this context, no, she can't.
Yeah, they are leading questions. The statement's been provided by the state.
Okay. Yeah. So, Mr. Lowry, what, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about seeing Ahmaud commit a crime before he jumped in his truck?
He didn't.
He didn't say anything about that.
No.
What, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about arresting or telling Ahmaud he was under arrest for criminal trespass?
He didn't.
What, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about telling Ahmaud he was under arrest for loitering?
He didn't.
What, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about telling Ahmaud he was under arrest for burglary?
He didn't.
What, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about telling Ahmaud he was under arrest for attempted burglary?
He didn't.
What, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about telling Ahmaud he was under arrest for carjacking?
He didn't.
Okay. What, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about telling Ahmaud he was under arrest for aggravated assault?
He didn't.
Okay. Did Mr. Bryan ever tell Ahmaud during that chase that he was under arrest for anything?
No, not that I was made aware of.
So at the point where your file was turned over to GBI, did that end your involvement in the case?
No.
Did it end your involvement in the case?
No.
Okay.
I had to keep taking calls as they came in regarding the case, but I would just forward that information to the GBI.
To GBI? You
Yes.
still got calls as the lead detective that you would forward to GBI?
Yes.
Okay. Other than that, did you do anything else?
It was calls for other concerned citizens and calls from the defendants in the case for their security, stuff like that.
Okay.
But all just forwarded to the GBI.
Okay. One moment, Your Honor. One more question. What, if anything, did Mr. Bryan say about seeing Ahmaud throw anything from his person during the entirety of that chase on that day?
He didn't.
He didn't say anything about that?
No.
That's all I have for you. The defense might have some questions for you, okay?
One moment.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Have we met before?
Just when I worked at the county, I think. See each other in the courthouse.
Very good. My first question for you is this. Wouldn't you agree, based on your training and experience, that context is the key to understanding the truth behind someone's words?
Yes.
And that's something that you personally think is very important in your work.
Context, yes. I think it can be.
If you understood Roddy Bryan to have meant that he deliberately attacked Mr. Arbery with his truck, if you understood him to say that he made an aggravated assault with a motor vehicle upon Mr. Arbery, could you have ignored that?
No, that wasn't the way I interpreted it at the time, though.
Yes. Well, obviously, that would be a very serious violent felony. But that wasn't your understanding.
No, sir.
Okay. Roddy Bryan never denied following Mr. Arbery, did he?
No, sir.
Roddy Bryan never denied angling his vehicle ahead of Mr. Arbery.
No, sir.
Roddy Bryan never denied blocking the path of Mr. Arbery.
No, sir.
Roddy Bryan never denied cutting in ahead of Mr. Arbery or cutting him off.
That's correct too.
He never denied trying to steer Mr. Arbery off the road.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But beyond that, all you can really do is speculate as to exactly how many times or exactly where Mr. Bryan did various things. Is that fair to say?
I don't know that I could say it's speculation. It was what he told me.
Okay, I'll rephrase. Is it fair to say that Mr. Bryan had trouble relating the events of that day in detail or in sequence?
I think everybody probably had trouble. There was a lot going on.
Fair enough. Now, I have a few other questions, and if I bounce around and you don't understand a question, you don't hesitate to say so.
Sure thing.
Okay. Do you have any personal relationship with Roddy Bryan?
No.
Okay. Have you ever seen him in the break room at the Glenn County Police Department?
Roddy Bryan?
Yeah.
No.
Have you ever seen him in the break room in the DA's office?
No.
Okay. You've certainly never taken classes with him.
No.
Okay. Is there any reason why you would give special treatment to Roddy Bryan?
No.
Okay. And your decisions in this case, personally, about how you went about your investigation, did they have anything whatsoever to do with whether Mr. Ahmaud Arbery was black or white?
No, sir.
I'm going to ask you a few questions about Mr. Bryan's demeanor, if I may.
Okay.
Did Roddy Bryan appear to you to be, at the time you spoke with him, mentally unstable?
No.
Did he appear to you to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs or other intoxicants?
No.
Did he come across to you as loud or boisterous?
No.
Did he come across to you as gleeful or bragging or boastful about his conduct that day?
No.
Did Mr. Bryan strike you as someone seeking attention or seeking the spotlight?
No.
Did Mr. Bryan drop F-bombs or other profanity during this interview?
I don't think so, but I'm not certain.
Okay. Was Mr. Bryan in any way disrespectful to you?
No, sir.
Is it fair to say that you personally in your department wanted Roddy Bryan's help to get to the truth about what happened to Ahmaud Arbery?
Yeah, I hope for compliance and cooperation from everybody I deal with.
At this point in time, you were not, quote unquote, after Mr. Bryan.
No, sir.
At this point, he's just a witness in your case.
Yes, sir.
And you're trying to reassure him that he's not the target of your investigation.
I don't really know that I can agree with that.
Fair enough. Is it fair to say that you were somewhat concerned,
Yes.
at least mildly concerned, about whether Mr. Bryan would, quote unquote, freak out when you went through the consent form?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. Because you wanted his help.
Yes.
Now, efforts had already been made to extract data from Mr. Bryan's cell phone. Am I correct?
I think that you're talking about on scene on the roadside.
Well, certainly on the roadside.
That had just off of verbal consent, but the actual Cellbrite download wasn't until after the form.
Now, Mr. Bryan doesn't know anything about Cellbrite, to your knowledge.
Yes.
Objection, speculation about what Mr. Bryan.
I'll rephrase. Did you explain Cellbrite to Mr. Bryan?
I don't remember.
Okay, you had to go to before you went to school. Did you know what Cellbrite was?
No.
Okay. But the bottom line is, notwithstanding the fact that he's already given you his cell phone, your department, his cell phone on the scene, you know that you need more than that. Not just the consent, you need a different kind of extraction of the material than Mr. Minshew can do on the side of the road.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in that context, again, I need an exhibit. My apologies. May I approach the witness? I mean, I won't approach the witness. I'm going to put it, and I've never done this before.
Just slide it right underneath.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Sir, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 298. That's the consent form in this case, is it not?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Bryan signed that for you, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when you were advising him in the consent form, whether you were thinking about it at the time, you indicated that you were looking at aggravated assault and homicide. Okay. In context, the aggravated assault that you're investigating is the tragic shooting of Ahmaud Arbery.
Was that a question?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and that was your understanding, yes? And you would assume, based on what you said, that that would be Mr. Bryan's understanding.
Objection is speculation.
I'll rephrase.
Thank you.
Did you give Mr. Bryan any reason to believe that you were investigating anything different
Then an aggravated assault?
than the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And on this same line, in your police report, you summarized the salient facts about what Mr. Bryan was relating to you, did you not, in a written report?
Yes, I summarized them.
Okay. Is it fairly safe to say you've been trained in writing police reports? A little bit.
Yeah, I guess.
You went to school, and you certainly seem capable of using big words. Am I correct?
Sometimes.
Okay. Your summary of the testimony you've related today amounted essentially to one sentence in that report. And I'm going to direct your attention to the bottom third of the third paragraph, if you'll take a moment and look at that. Do you see the sentence Mr. Bryan described?
Yes.
Does that refresh your memory as to what you wrote in your report?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Bryan described maneuvering his truck.
Objection to hearsay, Judge. You can't just read the report.
Did you write in your report, your summary of all this discussion about what Mr. Bryan's doing out there on the street that day as maneuvering his truck?
Objection, Judge. You can't just read the report. It's hearsay.
That's the police narrative, correct?
That's his.
Right. So he's describing what he heard in the statement that was just put in.
He's summarized all this testimony today.
Yeah, let's not read from his report then. I mean,
Okay.
you got the statement in. That's what I was discussing at the break.
I stand corrected. You were the lead agent in this case, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if at any point, and I'll come back to that in a second. Now, is it fair to say that homicide cases are not like other cases?
I guess.
In some ways, they're not. Okay. Is it fair to say you tried to explain the process to Mr. Bryan as best you could
The process of what?
of your investigation, what you were doing?
Perhaps.
Okay. Now, you did not Mirandize Mr. Bryan at this time, am I correct?
I don't recall. I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
Okay. The consent that Mr. Bryan gave you was for the
Yeah.
consent form. Now, if Mr. Bryan, in your presence, had admitted to the commission of a major felony, would you not have felt obligated to Mirandize him at that time?
Yes.
Okay, because at that time, had he said something like that, had you or he understood it that way, he might not have been free to leave.
Objection is speculation, Judge.
Not speculation, it's fact.
Let's restate the question.
I'll restate it. If you had understood, or Mr. Bryan appeared to you to believe, that he had admitted to a major felony, at that point you would have been obligated in your training to Mirandize him.
Yes.
Because at that point questions might have arisen as to whether he was free to leave.
Yes.
And you certainly wouldn't want to mess up your first murder investigation by failing to Mirandize a subject or a target of your investigation. Sir, at the time that this case was transferred from the Glenn County Police Department to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Mr. Bryan was still considered by your agency, well after the date of this interview, a witness in this case.
Yes.
Okay. And that's memorialized in the report that your agency provided to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Yes.
So is it fair to say that among the words that didn't come up in this interview besides citizen arrest was false imprisonment?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Among the legal terms that did not come up in this interview, in addition to citizen arrest, the phrase false imprisonment never came up in this interview.
No.
Because that wasn't your focus,
No.
and that wasn't what you heard.
No.
And I believe you reassured Mr. Bryan that your agency is required to investigate any homicide, regardless of justification.
Maybe. I don't remember for sure.
Okay. Well, it's been a long time since you conducted this investigation. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Directing your attention to the bottom third of page 2.
Okay, yes.
So basically, you assured Mr. Bryan that you were required to investigate any homicide, no matter what evidence there was of justification. That's your duty.
Yes.
And that's, in fact, what you were doing.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. In that context, that you're talking to a witness in this case, you didn't ask Roddy Bryan how far he got in school.
No.
You didn't ask Roddy Bryan if he had, for example, any learning disabilities.
No.
Okay. You didn't even ask him if he could read and write the English language, although that was presumed from the execution of the consent form. Okay. Now, there's been some discussion in this case of maps, and I'm not going to show you all of the maps, but I'm going to ask you if you recognize this document, which I believe is already in evidence. One moment, Your Honor.
If we're looking at numbering, let's get together and figure out what the numbering is so we can be clear.
Try not to be distracting.
All right, Your Honor.
Brian 1,
We're marking you Brian 50.
Brian 50.
I think that works. And Your Honor, technically this exhibit in the record has a state exhibit number as well, but we're not going to use that for our purposes right now.
As long as it's clear where we are in the record, that Brian 50 identifies that.
Let the record reflect as shown what's been marked as defendant Brian's 50 to opposing counsel.
What number is it?
Brian 50.
Brian 50 has a different state number. May I approach you with the charge?
Yes.
Sir, I'm showing you what's been marked as Brian Exhibit 50. Have you seen that or a copy of that before?
Yes.
Is that the map that you used during the interview of Mr. Roddy Bryan?
Yes.
All right. Now, that map isn't as pretty as some in this case. But that's the map that, in your interview, in the transcript you referenced showing Mr. Bryan.
Yes.
And you reviewed the actual video of this interview, have you not?
Yes.
Hopefully recently.
Yes.
Okay. Is it not fair to say that at times Mr. Bryan appears to be so focused on this map and these squiggles on there that his answers are not always responsive to your actual questions?
I don't remember enough detail to say one way or another.
Fair enough. This map is not color coordinated. It's all color coded. It's all one color. Am I correct?
Aside from the blue ink, yes.
Yeah. And, would it be fair to describe the blue ink by the end of this interview as chicken scratch?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would tender defendant Bryan 50.
No objection, Your Honor.
It's a bit.
No objection. No.
It's a bit.
Now, you in this interview, you went through the events with Mr. Bryan at least twice. Am I correct?
Maybe parts.
Wow. Okay.
It was kind of all over.
Were you ever able to get a complete statement from start to finish from Mr. Bryan of exactly what happened?
I believe so.
So that's why you went over it more than once?
Always double check, make sure things that
Okay.
I'm not saying I got a perfectly clear understanding the first time he answered a question.
Okay. And you did go over some things more than once?
Yes.
All right. Is it fair to say that Mr. Bryan struggled at times to find the right words?
Objection to speculation.
Did he appear to struggle at times to find the words he wanted?
Yes.
Okay. And at one point, you acknowledged that issue. Am I correct?
I don't
Okay.
remember.
Well, at this point, you're trying to get to the truth, right?
Yes.
And anything that interferes with your ability to do that, you're going to try and rectify.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And reassuring Mr. Bryan is part of that, kind of like a kid at a ball game. Good job. That a boy? No, never mind. I'll withdraw the question.
He didn't have a chance to explain or answer.
I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to prevent him from. Please, sir, please explain.
I didn't understand what you asked.
That's what I thought. So I'm just going to address it in a different way. Directing your attention to page 9, lines 13 through, I have 19. 13 through 19.
Objection, Judge, may we approach? This is something that Mr. Goff and I talked about before we even did this.
would be a good time for a break.
Well, I don't know. I need to address that. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can just have you step out into the jury room for just a moment.
All right, for the jury. Seated.
Okay. We leave the witness on the stand, or do I need to have the witness step down?
I'm comfortable with it. Your Honor.
Okay.
I'm not
So
saying
what is the issue?
Your Honor, what I'm trying to elicit is page 9, lines 14 and 19. Question from Investigator Lowry. I do understand where you're coming from because we've all, not necessarily this exact situation, we've all been there where crazy stuff happens that quick and you're still trying to process what just happened. Mr. Bryan responds affirmatively. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the kind of way it was. He's acknowledging that he's having problems processing these events that day. And that's in response to the detective's question. And it certainly goes to the rule of completeness. We've been bouncing all over this witness statement. And it's only fair that the jury know that he's having trouble processing what's going on. And because he can't process it, he's having trouble related to the officer. He's not trying to deceive the officer. He's struggling with his answers. And it goes to the weight the jury is going to give the answers that they have picked and chosen from this interview to present to the jury.
Your Honor, then Detective Lowry, his words aren't relevant to what Mr. Bryan understood or didn't understand. If Mr. Goff wants to get into what Mr. Bryan himself said, that's a different story, but I don't see how Mr. Lowry's words are relevant here. And essentially, the part that Mr. Goff wants to get into is all what Investigator Lowry said. And it does not go to the rule of completeness.
Your Honor, the rule of completeness goes to the conversation. It doesn't matter who started the conversation. What matters is that the conversation is complete. And for the conversation to be complete, that question and that answer, this jury needs to hear that.
Yeah, I'm going to permit it. I'm going to say if you want to follow up on redirect, you're welcome to do so. All right. Let's go get the panel.
Make sure the witness actually has a transcript.
So, I'm sorry, Judge. I have one more thing as it pertains to that. Can I mention that now?
I don't have anybody to stop him at the door. So whatever it is, go quick.
Okay.
Because when that door opens, we need to stop.
So at the point where this statement comes in, that where we just discussed, that was Mr. Bryan. That was Mr. Bryan relaying the shooting portion of this incident. So Investigator Lowry was asking him about the actual shooting portion, what he saw, what happened first, what happened second, when was the gun pulled, etc. So it would be unfair to the state because then I can't get up there and ask him specifically what Mr. Bryan was confused about. Because of course I can't get into that because of Bruton. So it would be one thing if Mr. Bryan was saying, well, I'm confused about what I did with my truck. But that is not the context of this statement that Mr. Goff is trying to get
Let me see
into.
the whole context,
Okay.
because that's not what I understood.
And it's lines 13 through...
14, it's 13 through 19. I said 14, it's 13 through 19.
But it starts on this page, Judge.
Okay. So, yep. Full transcript indicates, as the state has reflected, there is at least a page where there is a discussion, almost more than a page, of a discussion about the incident at the truck. And Investigator Lowry's question on page 9, starting at line 2, which is, yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. It's stuff like this. It happens in a blink of an eye, and then we start getting into all of this, appears to be directly related to the description of what occurred at the truck.
There's no question.
That, as the state says, the immediately preceding part says that, but the rule of completeness demands more. And it's putting us in a severance posture here where, again, we can't get to the meaning of what my client is saying.
Having read through it, again, the context of the quote that you are asking the court to permit is clearly with regard to the truck and the incident at the truck. I know you want to read that more broadly, but it is the investigator's comment to his description of what occurred at the truck that then results in this statement to court, hey, we're not going to permit it. I understand the context now much better than I did before, and it's not coming in.
I'm not questioning the court's ruling. I do want to make it clear we're objecting under the rule of completeness, that we should be allowed to ask specifically the question and answer reflected at page 9, lines 13 to 19 of the transcript interview that Detective Lowry had with Roddy Bryan.
All right, thank you. Let's go get the panel.
All right, so adjourned.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Again, I thank you for your patience. We've addressed the matters that we need to address before the court, and we are ready to proceed. Mr. Goff.
Yeah. Sir, I believe when you interviewed Mr. Bryan, he discussed his becoming involved in this matter more than once.
Yes.
And the first time, if I recall your testimony correctly from earlier today, he used the word overshot the road.
I think so.
Okay. Directing your attention to page 12, lines 23 to 25, through page 13, lines 1 to 7.
Okay. Okay.
The second time that you reviewed this with him, he described what he did as creeping out of the driveway. Is that correct?
Yes.
That he, quote, just crept out of the driveway good, unquote.
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to ascertain what creeping out of the driveway means as opposed to overshooting it? Did you follow up on that?
No, I took crept to mean slowly.
Okay. All right. And certainly that didn't have a whole lot to do with the shooting itself, did it?
Him creeping out of the driveway slowly? No.
Now, there were several points in time where he didn't seem to follow your question, were there not?
Objection to speculation.
Okay. Do you recall asking him whether he backed out of the ditch?
Yes.
Okay. And what was his answer?
No, I think I backed back into my drive.
Did that really answer your question?
No.
Okay. Was he looking at the map while he was doing this?
I don't remember.
Okay. Directing your attention to page 7. Is it fair to say that Mr. Bryan is fond of the word kinda or kind of?
Objection to speculation.
You're referring to the transcript itself, right?
I am. I'm referring to the portion of the transcript I thought the state had already gone into.
It's overruled.
Directing your attention to page 7, line 11. Does Mr. Bryan use the word phrase kind of?
Yes.
For him? Okay. Were you able to ascertain what Mr. Bryan meant when he said kind of?
No, I don't know that I saw clarification on that.
Okay. Directing your attention to page 50. Page 15, I'm sorry. Not page 50, page 15. And trying to find the line number for you, sir. All right, directing your attention to line 3. Again, Mr. Bryan's using the word kind of angled.
Yes.
All right. And then on the following page, I'm sorry, it's page 16 at lines 1 and 2. And I believe you already testified this, that Mr. Bryan didn't put, quote unquote, much emphasis on it. That being the angling.
Yes, that's what he said.
Did you have any idea what he meant by much emphasis?
Objection to speculation.
I'll rephrase. What did you take it to mean?
Objection to relevance about what Detective Lowry took it to mean.
This is 2.
Directing your attention to page 14. again, I believe that the state went over part of this with you on direct examination. Mr. Bryan told you that he was going to back up at Mr. Arbery. Am I correct?
Yes.
But to do that, he'd be following Mr. Arbery in reverse.
I think we've got a juror that might need some water.
I'm so sorry.
We've got some water on the way.
Yeah, so, where? Good. We're moving.
At that point, whether he used the words or not, he was saying he would be following him in reverse.
That he would be. No, I don't think that's what he says. He says I put it in reverse and was going to back up at him.
All right. And then, before he could do that, he tells you that Arbery had run up the road. Am I correct? He, quote unquote, made his move to go down the road at Hackendaw.
Yes.
Directing your attention back to the map, such as it is, that you're working with during this interview. In order to follow Mr. Arbery up the street, he's basically backing up away from him to do that.
Are you asking that?
Yes.
I don't understand. You're asking if he is reversing up the road following him?
Well, I believe you've testified that Mr. Bryan is fixing, I think that's the word Mr. Bryan uses, to back up at him. But by this time, Mr. Arbery has already changed direction and is running up the other street.
Okay.
Correct?
Yes.
So at that point, when Mr. Bryan is backing up, he's got to back away from Mr. Arbery to follow him.
I didn't see where he turned.
Oh, fair enough. It's hard to tell from what he's describing exactly what he's doing. Is that fair?
Can be, yeah.
And in fact, if I understand may I switch on? All right, sir. I'll try and use this device here again. Can you see the map, sir?
Yes.
Or kind of?
It's upside down.
Does this help you? Assuming I can stabilize it. You see it now?
Kind of. It's just.
You're about to get a little time.
Oh, wow. That's so much better. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Now see how much. Oh. Okay, that's not. Let me get around here. Take the Lowry. Do you see this kind of L-shaped squiggle off to the side?
I do.
That reflects Mr. Bryan telling you that he's basically going down that road while Mr. Arbery is going up the road behind him. That's what that squiggle means.
I don't know what that squiggle means. This was almost 2 years ago.
Objection, Judge, if he could just let him finish his answer.
I thought he had. Go ahead.
Okay.
I don't want to cut you off, sir.
I thought I was done too.
Okay. All right. I promise not to use that thing again. All right. Now, did you ever ask Mr. Bryan what he meant when he said ankle?
I don't think so.
It wasn't germane to the investigation at that point.
No.
Okay. And I believe earlier today you described it as steer.
Yes, I think.
Okay. And at no point did Mr. Bryan identify to you a mathematical angle, did he?
No.
So when we're talking about emphasizing angles or good angles or bad angles, we don't know whether that's a 90 degree, 45 degree, 180 degree, I don't even know the one in between, 225, 100. There's been no discussion made of that, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. And for the purposes that the state, when the state was examining you earlier this morning, did they ever ask you the distance between Mr. Arbery and Mr. Bryan when these angling events or steering events took place?
No.
Okay. That would make a difference to you, wouldn't it? If you were investigating an aggravated assault with a motor vehicle, that would make a difference, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I mean, say for example, you're in a patrol car and you want to talk to somebody, and maybe they don't want to talk to you, and you angle your squad car in front of them. If you do that 6 inches away from them, that's a little bit different than if they're 60 feet down the road, isn't it?
Objection to relevance, Your Honor. The hypothetical, as it pertains to this case, relevant.
So let's stick to what he knows and what was testified to in the statements.
Yes.
If you can wrap that together.
I think I can. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Did Mr. Bryan ever relate to you tearing up any of his neighbors' yards?
I don't think so.
Okay. Did he ever relate to you making skid marks or other marks on the roadway when he stopped short?
No.
Okay. So it would be fair to say then that any angling that was done had to be at a relatively low speed.
Objection to speculation.
I'll rephrase. Did you ever ask Mr. Bryan, and I think I know the answer, but I have to ask, did you ever ask Mr. Bryan at what speed he was traveling when any of these angling maneuvers took place?
No.
Okay. But you were out there at Satilla Shores that day, were you not?
Yes.
Okay. I think at one point you testified you went down to 220 Satilla, the English
Yes.
residence. And, of course, you were not very far from Mr. Bryan's house at that time. Did you notice any unusual marks in the road that you thought might be related to this case?
In front of 220?
Anywhere on the scene that day? Did you see, I'm not talking about the body of the deceased. I mean, that's a different matter. I'm talking about tire tracks, road marks, skid marks. Did you observe anything out there that day that would have suggested aggressive driving?
Not that I can recall.
Now, Mr. Bryan never used the word chaos in his interview with you, did he?
I don't think so. I'd have to go back and reread it.
But from his description of the events, would you characterize that description as chaotic?
Objection to relevance about how he would characterize the description of events, Judge.
I'll move on.
What was that? Are you describing based on Mr. Bryan's statement, or he was at the scene?
I should have been clear. Based on his statement, what Mr. Bryan is relating.
Okay, that's his statement.
Okay. Did Mr. Bryan express to you uncertainty as to what he should do that day before the shooting?
Before the shooting? I vaguely think so. I'd have to go back and review if you could.
Okay. Directing your attention. I have the line number, but not the page number. Okay. Directing your attention to page 5 to lines 18 and 19.
Yes.
Did Mr. Bryan express to you that he didn't know what to do
He did.
when he saw Mr. Arbery coming back?
Yes.
Did he express any eagerness to confront Mr. Arbery at that time?
No.
Did he suggest in any way that this was something he relished or looked forward to?
No.
And later in the interview, of course, and I got to be careful here, is it fair to say that there are times, during your interview with Mr. Bryan, is it fair to say there are times that he feels like he's alone out there with Mr. Arbery?
Objection to speculation, Your Honor.
I'll rephrase. In so many words, did Mr. Bryan essentially tell you that there were times when he felt like he was alone with Mr. Arbery out there?
I think I understand what you're trying to ask. If you're referring to the statements he made about Mr. Arbery trying to get into his truck, then
At that time, did he describe to you being out there alone with Mr. Arbery?
I don't know that he used the words alone or described it in that way.
Well, did he use the words at some point he come to find out later? Do you remember that?
No, I'd have to look.
Does he describe moments when he can't see anybody else out there other than Mr. Arbery?
I don't remember.
Fair enough. Now, I believe you've already testified to Mr. Bryan or reviewed Mr. Bryan's statement about Mr. Arbery trying to get in his truck. And I believe directing your attention to page 18. Do you remember the state asking you, suggesting that Mr. Bryan wished that he had hit Mr. Arbery?
Yes.
That's not accurately reflecting the nature of that statement, is it?
I don't know.
Did you take Mr. Bryan to be wondering aloud whether he might have in fact saved Mr. Arbery's life?
Objection to speculation.
Yeah, you're asking him what he thinks the statement might mean?
I'm asking how he took the statement.
Okay, sustained.
When Mr. Bryan said that he did hit him, was there anything about his demeanor or body language suggesting that he intended to?
No, I don't remember which time he might have said that, but I don't know what body language would look like indicative of him actually doing that. He didn't seem any more distressed than somebody would be in this kind of stressful situation.
Would you describe his demeanor as remorseful?
I don't know that I was around him long enough to see remorse. It looked more just kind of shocked.
Shocked. Okay. Certainly not gleeful.
No.
A few easy ones. Mr. Bryan, or you observed in examining Mr. Bryan's cell phone, did you observe whether it was password protected?
I don't recall. I just know from seeing the consent form earlier that I think it said no password or no passcode.
Directing your attention to the top part of page 2 of the transcript. Line 10.
Correct.
You recall asking him whether there was a password,
Yes.
and he told you no.
Yes.
And if there had been one, you would have asked him for it.
Yes.
I believe Mr. Bryan told you that there was lumber in the back of his truck during this incident.
Yeah, I think so.
Mr. Bryan told you that he got the keys from his house.
Yes, inside the house.
Okay. I got to ask you about the now famous video that Mr. Bryan made in Satilla Shores that day. I'm directing your attention to page 16, lines 9 through 25, through page 17, lines 1 through 12. If the state has no objection, I'm simply going to ask you to read that portion of the transcript beginning at line 16, line 9. Page 16, line 9.
You said page 16, line what?
Page 16, line 9, excerpt 5.
Pretty good understanding of it now. So I think if I'm recalling correctly, when you're on the side of the road, you were telling me you might have had another video of the same guy on your phone from a previous incident, and Bryan says no. I say, okay, I misunderstood that then. Bryan says, no, I thought those two videos on there and I must not have been recording. And I say, well, the first you do, you said stop at 19?
I'm sorry, continue to page 17, line 12.
Okay. Well, the first you do have two videos of the same incident today. Bryan says, well, one of y'all copied it somehow or another or something maybe. I say, okay. He says, I mean, exact same incident? And I say, yeah, it's weird.
I'm sorry, you're turning the page. Okay.
Yes. What line do you want me to stop at on 17?
Start with so you've got. I think it's at the top of the page.
Got,
line 12.
okay. Got like the very last two videos, photos, anything. One is a longer video that contains the same, and Mr. Bryan says they tried to crop it and send it the original Officer Minshew. I said, okay. And he said, tried to crop it and send it, and he couldn't do it, so I thought there was two of those. I thought I had started filming him right before we got to the fork, before we got to the major intersection right there. I thought I had started filming there, but apparently I didn't. Apparently I didn't hit the button. I say, so you don't, from what I recall watching the video, it looks like it starts as you're like coming up this road, catching back up to them, like going back towards that intersection. Mr. Bryan says, yes. I say, okay, so yeah, like roughly though, there's somewhere, seems like you start recording, because Bryan says, probably, yeah. I say, coming up that road and watching, as you round the corner, you can see him running. Mr. Bryan says, mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir. Now, you were asked a number of questions earlier about things that Mr. Bryan did and didn't say. Mr. Bryan did say that he'd heard stuff that's been happening in the neighborhood. That'd be page 19.
Yes.
All right. But at that time, you didn't follow up with him about that, did you?
No, not there, because I don't remember if it was before or after, but I'd already asked if he knew Mr. Arbery, recognized him, had ever seen him before.
Fair enough. You didn't ask Mr. Bryan whether his family had been victims of theft and property crimes in Satilla Shores, did you?
No, not specifically.
Okay. You didn't ask whether Roddy Bryan had installed a home surveillance system?
No, I have no reason at the time.
I'm not questioning your judgment of your techniques. I'm just covering a few facts.
Yes,
Almost done. You never asked Roddy Bryan about his night owl video?
His night owl video?
Yes,
No.
sir. Do you know how Roddy Bryan's cell phone wound up in Sergeant Leska's car?
No. I don't recall.
Do you know how many officers besides yourself were on the scene that day without functioning body cams or dashboard videos?
I don't.
Okay. And it's not your job to keep track of that, is it?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm going to use the word interview, but you feel free to explain, okay? But your interview with Mr. Bryan, my word for it, on the scene is not recorded.
Correct.
Okay. I don't believe it's documented, is it?
It wasn't a very detailed, thorough interview. It was just really viewing the video and then getting him to agree to come back and sit down and speak with me.
Fair
But
enough.
yes.
Is there any way for you to say how many other brief or other undocumented statements might be out there that day?
No, I have no way of guessing.
Okay. So is it fair to say by the time you finish interviewing Mr. Bryan that evening, I think it's evening, isn't it?
Yes.
By the time you finish interviewing Mr. Bryan that evening, he has been back and forth through the events of that day several times with multiple police officers?
I don't know what other officers he went through it with, but I could say probably. I know we spoke with it briefly on scene about it, and then again at headquarters, so I would say at least like twice with me.
Okay. And you may have been privy to some of that information, but probably not all of it.
Yes.
Okay. Things that you didn't ask. A lot of time spent on that earlier. You didn't ask Roddy Bryan whether he was armed or unarmed at the time of the shooting in your interview. Am I correct?
Yes.
Would that be because you'd already covered that out on the scene?
Yes. So I thought. I don't know that I asked him that on the scene.
Okay.
But
All right. Well, from the circumstances, it seemed clear to you that he was unarmed.
yes.
You didn't ask Roddy Bryan about Matt Albenzi.
No.
Okay.
Ask him about Matt Albenzi. What about Matt Albenzi?
Well, in terms of trying to understand why Mr. Arbery was running in the way that he did you ask him whether he and Mr. Albenzi had any contact?
Oh, no. No.
Did you ask him if he could see Mr. Albenzi?
No.
Okay. And of course, you didn't interview Mr. Albenzi. You don't know.
No, sir.
Okay. You didn't ask Roddy Bryan whether he called 911, did you?
I don't remember if I did.
Okay. And partly that would be because under Georgia law, Mr. Bryan had no legal
Objection,
obligation
Your
to do
Honor.
so.
Under Georgia law,
Should I rephrase?
Yes.
The subject of 9/11 never came up with Mr. Bryan, did it?
No, I don't think so.
You didn't perceive it to be pertinent to your investigation at that time?
No.
Okay. Is it fair to say that when you examined Mr. Bryan's truck, that you did not recover any prints or possible prints from either the front or the back of the truck?
No. Everything that I recovered was from the driver's side, aside from the unknown volleyball, soccer ball print on the back.
You did not recover any cotton fibers from the front or back of the pickup truck?
Just for clarification, you're saying like just the very, very front and the very back, excluding the sides?
The grill and the front bumper, the back bumper, and the tailgate.
Collected nothing from the front or the back.
Okay. And
Did the state even
show you a picture of the front of the truck today?
I don't think I did, or I don't think I saw it. I don't remember there being one in there.
There's certainly no physical evidence to suggest that Mr. Bryan's vehicle made any contact on the front or the back or on the corners with Mr. Arbery.
I don't understand what you're. Can you rephrase that? You said it kind of like a statement.
Okay. There are no fingerprints on either of the front corners of the truck.
None that I was aware of. None that I processed.
No cotton fibers on either corner of the front of the truck.
None that I was aware of. None that I processed.
No fingerprints or cotton fibers on either of the back corners of the truck.
No.
The prints that you recovered, or suspected prints, and the cotton fibers are all on the driver's side of the vehicle, behind or at the door on the driver's side.
Yes.
Okay. And that would be consistent with the testimony or the statement that Mr. Bryan gave you.
Yes.
All right. And technically, let me see if I understand the sequence of events. Y'all decide on the scene that you want to do a crime scene work on the truck, right?
I didn't make that call. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Somebody made the call. Okay. But at the time that decision was made, whoever made it, you were down at the Public Safety Center, correct?
You lost me. So are you saying that they brought are you asking if they brought the crime scene truck to the scene in Satilla Shores?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not helping you here. My apologies. You asked Mr. Bryan to bring his pickup truck from Satilla Shores down to the Glynn County Police Department Public Safety Center.
Yes.
Just on the other side of the interstate, right?
Yes.
You asked Mr. Bryan to do that.
Well, no. I just asked him to come for an interview. He happened to drive the truck, and he told me about the dings and the smudges while I was there interviewing him.
Okay. And this is several hours after the shooting at this point, is it not?
Yes.
This is after Mr. Bryan's been sent home, to your knowledge.
That I processed his truck?
No, that you. By the time you requested him to come downtown, he's already gone home with his truck.
I don't think his truck was still on scene. I think from the scene, he came from the scene to the PD for the interview and for the truck to be processed.
Okay, so you don't know whether he went home with it first?
I don't.
Okay. Is it fair to say that Glynn County has no shortage of car washers?
I don't know.
Did you observe any effort on the part of Mr. Roddy Bryan to tamper with or destroy the evidence in this case?
No.
Mr. Bryan wanted you to have the evidence.
Objection, speculation.
Is there anything more? Thank you, Your Honor. Is there anything more that Mr. Bryan could have done to help you with your investigation?
I don't know.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
No further questions.
That cross in that you would break before cross.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a 15-minute recess, and we'll come back for continuation of the evidence.
All right, for the jury.
Hand them back to bring to the court's attention before we bring them back in for us.
I'm going to go ahead and have you step down. If you could please be back in 15 minutes for a continuation. I remind you, you're under oath. Do not discuss your testimony with anyone during the break.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The matter is this, Your Honor. We had some testimony by this officer when the state asked the question on March 5th, 2020, you were not getting much traction in the case, and the case went inactive. Remember that testimony?
I believe there was an objection.
There was an objection to it as well, but that remained the testimony in the court.
It was an objection.
I'm sorry, that was when the objection was imposed. It was not.
That's right, and so Larissa
I was
asked.
time stamping it in my brain. nothing
Yes,
more.
and he
Thank you.
said, yeah, what she said, objection. It was inactive.
So I'm asking for permission to cross this officer on the fact that that's not actually true. This officer did a lot more investigation and action in the case all the way up through July of 2020, and I would like to go into the things that he also did. Now that's going to cause some issues maybe with the state, because what he did are some of the things that the court has said we can't get into. For example, some of them are not things that the court said we can't get into, but the state has now given the jury the impression that this officer didn't do anything after 3/5, and that the case wasn't getting traction, was inactive until the case was handed over to the GBI. That's simply not true. This officer did a lot more, Your Honor. In fact, on 3/12, he received documents from the coroner's office that were gateway records for Mr. Arbery. On 3/17, he received a report about the blood in the case, the toxicology. On 3/17, on March 12th, he got some of the gateway behavioral records about Ahmaud Arbery. On April 1st, he got the autopsy report from the medical examiner. On May 29th, he got the full records of Gateway. And on July 14th, he got the heart blood results back that said there was positive THC. And whether he did this before the GBI got involved or later, he was still working with the GBI, dealing with some of these issues. And so it would not be accurate or fair to leave the jury with the impression that this officer ended his investigation within 12 days of the shooting. That is simply not the case. And I intend, with the court's permission, to bring the truth to light for the jury. Now, if the court says I can't do it in the way that I want to do it, then I just want to be clear about what I can and cannot do. But I believe the state has opened the door to us talking about what he's done.
Your Honor, the state's intention was once again to just smoothly transition this because nobody wanted to go into anything that took place about the real reason that everything stopped, because it's messy and irrelevant as to the guilt or innocence of these defendants. In this case, simply asking him, did you receive additional records on March 12th, March 17th, April 1st, May 29th, and July 14th? By the way, the July 29th and July 14th records came to him even though they were requested by the GBI. Is a simple way to go, oh yeah, there was some other stuff I did. This appears to be a very good strategy by the defense to try and circumvent your order and then put into play evidence that you have ruled inadmissible, such as the gateway records, the blood toxicology, and then the additional blood and the heart blood results. So the state would object fully to going into all of this because what they want is, how do I put this nicely? What they say they want is to show that this officer did some more stuff. But what they want to do is go into stuff that you've already ruled inadmissible in order to show this officer did more stuff. It's very easy to ask one simple question. Did you receive additional documents on this date, this date, this date, this date, and this date? Because all he did was receive stuff in. He didn't actually do anything but receive documents. And it was never the state's intention by asking that question because it's our understanding that when we asked him, he basically said, yeah, it kind of went inactive. Those were his words to the state during the interview. Is that correct?
He said lost traction, then he said inactive.
Okay, and that's what he said when we interviewed him.
Yes.
So this is something that we don't feel opens the door to any of this. And if this is solely what the defense claims it is, which is, oh, this officer did do some more stuff, then it's real easy to just ask him, you received documents on this date, this date, this date, this date, this date, didn't you, as part of the investigation? Doesn't matter what the documents are, because you've already ruled that that evidence is inadmissible for other reasons. And it really doesn't have anything to do with the credibility of this officer or the investigation, because obviously Richard Dahl will come in and testify that on May 8th, he received the case and began his investigation as part of the GBI, which this officer has already also testified to. The GBI came in and took over the investigation. So we ask that you deny the motion. If you're going to grant the motion to go ahead and ask these questions, then the question should simply be, on these dates, did you receive additional documents?
We now have 2 affirmative presentations by the state to this jury that the case, the investigation by the Glenn County Police Department stalled and nothing happened. That was what they were told in opening by Ms. Donikowski. And now the lead investigator on the case has been asked to testify that they weren't getting any traction and the case went inactive. And it is still, Your Honor, it's March 5th that they've established that that happened. We still have the rest of the month of March. We still have the entire month of April. And we still have a week into May before the GBI gets the case. It is our responsibility to help the jury understand the total investigation done by this department. The fact that they were thorough in their investigation, the fact that they did all this work in their investigation is important to establish. I understand the court has ruled. And if the court says, yes, you can ask him that they got quote-unquote documents or they got quote-unquote records from various sources, or if you prevent us from saying what the sources are, and we just are able to establish they continue to work on this case and follow up, I suggest that that's not enough. But I still think we need to correct this. And I would just ask the court to consider, they've now done it twice, it was intentional, and that is putting us in a position we are not going to be given a fair trial.
We're in recess for at least another 10 minutes, and I'll come back and I'll let you know where you are.